G'day mates, my name is Mordecai, and welcome back to the show where an inexperienced TTRPG player narrates various RPG-related horror stories as a learning tool. Sometimes it is possible for people to become rather attached to their game, which seems reasonable, especially when you consider the amount of investment that's innate to the core aspects of play. Aspects such as character creation, world building, encounter balancing, and plans for story arcs. Whilst not every table will have or use concrete methods for exposition for these components, it is possible that the DM and players can step over the line of what is reasonable. Some examples of crossing the line can include incorporating overpowered magic items as part of a character's kit or backstory, having an encounter that's designed to kill the player's interest in the game, and disallowing saving throws for story reasons. Today's story features a player who is contemplating leaving the game, whilst being unsure if a line has been crossed by their dungeon master. Before we get started with the narration, if you like my content and want to see more of it, be sure to subscribe and like the video. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy! Today's story is titled, I Don't Know If This Was Reasonable, and is written by The Cobbler Impeached. I am a player in a Pathfinder 1st edition game that had 5 players. After what happened last session, 2 of the players left. I want to know if I should also leave. The background to the session is this. Someone, or something, had been kidnapping people from the road and warping them into horrible monsters, and we were trying to find out who, or what it was. We first tried to set up an ambush for them in the area that they'd been kidnapping people, but instead, my wizard got stripped of his items and teleported into a dungeon, tied up, with no save or any indication of an attacker. He did manage to cast Dimension Door and teleport out of the dungeon, but he was nigh useless for 3 whole sessions whilst the rest of the party went through that same dungeon to get his items back. We had found a massive room full of them in that same dungeon, with about 1,500 of the monsters in it. 1,500? Are you kidding me? Most of them were chained up, but 30 were unrestrained and walking around. We could take maybe 7 at a time on a good day, so fighting them wasn't exactly an option. However, there was a door on the far side of this room, which appeared to be the only way forward through the dungeon. One of us, I can't remember who, came up with the idea of teleporting into the room from the surface. Using the entrance to the basement as a reference point, we determined the exact point we needed to teleport to from the surface to be 10 feet behind that door. One of our characters was very much against the idea, but their character and mine were at odds. You know, a lawful good wizard versus a neutral evil anti-paladin. So my character ignored theirs. My wizard could only take 2 others along with him using a combination of Dimension Door and a magic item that let him take an additional person. So the character who hated the idea and 1 other remained on the surface. We agreed to carry out the plan in the following session. That session rolls around, and I'm pretty excited. We cast our buffing spells and teleported in. And here's what happened. We came out on the wrong side of the door. The GM said that we were in the wrong place, so we appeared in between rows of the chained up monsters. Our dungeon master told us to make perception checks, and the highest we got across all 3 characters was an 18. We had all failed. So one of the monsters casted Create Pit, and 2 of us fall in. I came up with a plan. The 3rd character who had not fallen in would go into the pit, and I would cast Dimension Door to take us all back out again. We all agreed to do this. The plan was put into action. I cast Dimension Door, and the spell failed. Apparently, the room was warded against teleporting out, but not teleporting in. It is worth noting that my wizard had cast Detect Magic earlier, and had found an aura of faint abjuration. For those of you who don't know Pathfinder 1st edition, that meant that it was an abjuration spell cast by a 5th level or lower character. Any spells that ward against teleportation are higher level than that, so I had assumed we were safe from such spells. Apparently, I was wrong. The shackles holding the other 1,500 monsters had disappeared, and they all proceeded to pummel us into the dirt. The GM said that there was no way out for us. Our characters died in that horrid pit. And that was the end of the session. After the fact, the GM reveals that he had sent his notes on what would happen to the player who was decidedly against us teleporting into the cavern, and that was why they were against it. The other two players immediately left the game, but I had stayed behind. The Dungeon Master made fun of them afterwards for rage quitting, but not once did either of them actually rage. Not once did he say something like, "Are you sure?" before our plan was put into action. And that's the end of the story. So, I am of the opinion that the OP should leave the table. Alternatively, the OP could maybe start DMing for the group. I'm not sure, but I am certain that the DM definitely crossed a line on what is reasonable during the game. Now, I'm not saying dropping 1,500 monsters like that is completely unreasonable, since if that's the number of hostiles, that's a distinct warning. But then you have the vast majority of these enemies chained up and unable to act, so only a small portion of them are able to move around or take actions against the players. To me, that sounds like a scenario for attempting to sneak past them, or else retreating and calling for reinforcements, or maybe even getting a local kingdom to warn travelers to not use this particular road until the kingdom can actually mobilize a force to counter the number of monsters. There are, however, things that are distinctly unreasonable. You know what would be a great idea? If I were a dungeon master and was playing favourites, so I passed along my notes for the next session to my favourite player at the table, so they had a distinct advantage over the other players? In fairness, I think if I were a player and were given those notes from the DM, that doesn't automatically mean my actual character knows what's written on those notes. After all, this could lead to a good story arc for the character as a form of player conspiracy. That said, there's a difference between player conspiracy and player favoritism. Perhaps the final nail in the coffin for the game itself is the blatant "you fell for my trap" mentality of the DM, especially since the players already teleported out of the dungeon through the Dimension Door spell. So, retroactively saying that the players can't anymore, that's distinctly unreasonable. I genuinely do not like retroactive continuity, especially when it's done poorly, but that's a story and explanation for another narration. What I will say is that it's fine up to a point if players get trapped, so long as it isn't completely inescapable. The moment where there's no way out, the only way out is to leave the game, or attempt to explain to the DM why all of what he was doing was wrong. As a player, these are the lessons I learned from this horror story. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe and leave a like. It's free to do, and you can change your mind later. If you have any thoughts on this story or feedback on how it can improve, feel free to leave a comment. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you all next time.